Centre Block, one of the country's most recognized buildings. It's the crown jewel of Ottawa's Parliament buildings and a fundamental symbol of Canada. Designed in the Gothic Revival style by John Pearson, it's an architectural masterpiece. A combination of immense size and scope with painstaking artistry and craftsmanship. It's reminiscent of Westminster, and yet it's uniquely Canadian. Home to both Houses of Parliament, this building is often referred to as an icon of democracy. Now this historic building is closed, undergoing the largest and most complex heritage rehabilitation project ever undertaken in Canada. Modelled after the British House of Lords, the Senate is the upper house in Canada's Parliament. And it's here, in Centre Block's Senate chamber, where senators have met and debated national issues for nearly a century. The Senate has a crucial role in the lawmaking process. It reviews, debates, and revises legislation introduced by both chambers.
If we don't stand up for them, then who the heck is going to?
Senators scrutinize bills passed in the House of Commons.
We have, through our amendments, perfected the bill.
They can also propose their own.
Honourable Senators, I am pleased to speak today to Bill S-233, an act to amend the Customs Act and the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act.
A bill must pass both houses, here in the Senate and the House of Commons, before it can become law.
Order that a message be sent to the House of Commons to acquaint that House that the Senate has passed this bill.
Senators are appointed by the Governor-General on the advice of the Prime Minister. They can serve until the mandatory retirement age of 75. From the carpet to the leather of the senators' desks to the thrones, nearly everything in this chamber is decorated in red. It's hardly surprising it's commonly known as the Red Chamber, as opposed to the green of the House of Commons. The gold ceiling, the bronze chandeliers, intricate oak paneling, and stunning red thrones all combine to create a regal space. One fit for ceremonial affairs, and one fit for royalty. After all, this is the chamber where the reigning monarch would visit when attending Parliament.
The North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Canada's capital is the scene of an event unique in the annals of the British Commonwealth of Nations, when on the very day of their arrival, the King and Queen drive to the Parliament buildings where His Majesty is to give royal assent to legislation enacted by the Dominion Parliament. Today, Ottawa is the capital of the Empire. For not since 1854 has royal assent been given by a British sovereign in person, and never before has this ceremony taken place outside the mother country. In the Senate chamber, the King of Canada, in the presence of the representatives of every part of his dominion, sanctions the measures placed before him.
Parliamentary tradition dictates that it is only in the Senate chamber where all three elements of Parliament can assemble: the Sovereign, the Senate, and the House. Whether it's an opening of Parliament, a speech from the throne, or a royal assent ceremony to make bills into law, events that are full of pomp, pageantry, and ancient traditions. Now the Red Chamber has been stripped to its bones, most of its heritage assets removed. Like the House of Commons chamber, it's barely recognizable now. It's filled with floor-to-ceiling scaffolding. Louise Cowley is director for the long-term vision plan for the Senate of Canada.
So when you go in now, everything's peeled back. It doesn't look the same at all, which is actually, I think, an exciting time to see it because you really get to see the bones of the building and then you'll get to see it rebuilt again. And so to really realize the extent of the renovation, I think now is an exciting time to be inside the center block. And then it'll all be pieced back together.
The Center Block project is the pinnacle of a larger, decades-long endeavor to restore and modernize the parliamentary precinct. Like members of Parliament, senators have been involved in the decision-making process.
In 2016, a subcommittee on the long-term vision and plan was created, and it consists of senators, and then they actually work with us to inform the design. But we also work closely with our partners, so House of Commons, Library of Parliament, ensure all the needs are met. So we have to balance the needs of a modern Parliament. That's first and foremost. It is a place of business, but we also know it is a place for Canadians. So on our team, we're looking at what do we need, how can we do it, what are our options, and then we talk to our users and see like what's manageable, what can we do, and we work with Public Works to come up with those decisions.
One of those decisions is to make sure the Senate chamber is returned to its former glory.
In the Senate chamber, it'll look very similar in the end state, so we're going to restore a lot of the heritage features, but all the modern infrastructure will be hidden and will include lighting and broadcasting. So before there was no permanent infrastructure to broadcast in the Senate chamber, but that will be provided in the end state. And in terms of the seating arrangement will look much the same. So unlike the House of Commons, where there's constantly a changing number of parliamentarians, the Senate remains fixed. So we're going to restore the existing desks and we're going to bring them back in, and so the seating arrangement will look the same. The other thing that will come back again is the galleries. So that's the place for Canadians to really see democracy in action in the Senate chamber, but they're going to be fully rehabilitated and they're going to be fully accessible.
A new addition to the chamber will be a viewing platform.
So we're actually standing in the south gallery of the Senate chamber. We're at the 4th level right now, and the level I'm standing on is actually going to be something new we didn't have before. We're going to be enclosing this in glass, and it's going to be a viewing platform where you can look down onto what's happening in the chamber. Below us will be the galleries.
Center Block was built with 3 large courtyards. For decades, they have been unused. The plan is to now enclose these spaces, providing much-needed room.
So here we are on the roof. Over there is the West Light Court and the Hall of Honor, which will have the Hall of Honor infill. And here is the East Light Court. Come over and I'll show you what it's going to look like. So the East Courtyard is currently an exterior space, but in the end state it will be covered in glass. So the intent of light coming into the building will still remain, and it'll be open all the way down to level 2 and level 3. So you'll enter the courtyard through elevators on level 2, and then you can make your way up to level 3 to then enter into the galleries.
Meet Tamara Dolan. She was the Senate's curator during the early stages of the project.
When we look around the chamber, we can really see signs and symbols of the history of Canada.
That meant her job was to make sure that the Senate's collection of paintings, sculptures, ceremonial objects, and heritage furniture were all protected during the Center Block rehabilitation.
So the Senate's collection includes around 6,000 pieces, of which 1,000 were in Center Block prior to the closure. They're definitely the most significant pieces within the collection, like the Senate mace, as well as the furniture in the Senate chamber, the thrones, a number of artworks, portraits of the French kings, and of course the monarchs and consorts.
Before Center Block was closed, this collection of British monarchs and consorts lined the walls of the Senate foyer. In this painting, King Edward VII is portrayed. He came to Canada as Prince of Wales in 1860 and laid the cornerstone of the original Parliament buildings. King George V reigned from 1910 to 1936. And here we see Robert Swain's painting of King George VI, Queen Elizabeth II's father, who was sovereign during the Second World War. He was the first reigning monarch to set foot on Canadian soil when he toured Canada in 1939 with Queen Elizabeth, the future Queen Mother. This portrait of Queen Elizabeth II was painted in 1957. 5 years after the beginning of her reign. It's by Canadian artist Lilias Torrance Newton and is one of 2 original paintings displayed here. The other original is this full-length state portrait of Queen Victoria. Painted in 1842 by British artist John Partridge, it was acquired to hang in Montreal's Bon Secours Market, which briefly housed the Parliament of the Province of Canada. It's been rescued from 4 fires, including the 1916 fire that devastated the original center block.
Because of the size of the paintings, there was a certain challenge of getting them out of the building. So we worked with Public Services and Procurement Canada, as well as the Canadian Conservation Institute. And conservators were actually brought to Centre Block and did condition assessments of the paintings. We determined if any conservation work was needed in order to remove them from the building, because whenever we're moving something, you're introducing a new risk to the painting. What we then did is we created mock-ups of the sizes of the largest frames, and we actually used those mock-ups to walk the different routes out of the building to see, would it be best to go out of the loading dock, would it be best to go out of the front door? So then that way, on the actual date of the move themselves, the paintings were removed from the walls. We typically took the painting out of the frame itself, and then we would remove the frame and remove the painting and bring them to their final location.
Dolan and her team faced an even bigger challenge with the removal of these 8 historic paintings. Scenes from the First World War are depicted. They have hung here since 1921, and yet these paintings were not originally designed for this space. When Centre Block was officially opened on February 26, 1920, the Senate chamber was still under construction. This photo was taken inside the upper chamber. There was still much work to be done. Just under a year later, the opening of the 5th session of the 13th Parliament of Canada took place, here in the newly built Senate chamber. Painters, carpenters, and decorators worked all night to ensure that the room was ready. Many of the elaborate stone carvings and woodwork had not yet been completed, and these paintings were installed to cover the plain walls. Originally intended to be displayed in a dedicated war memorial building, these paintings became a permanent fixture here. They have dominated the walls of this chamber for over a century. And now these paintings are being removed for safekeeping and restoration. They will be stored at the Canadian War Museum.
When we think about Centre Block, the original building burnt down in 1916 when Canada was off fighting in the First World War. So as we look around the design, the memories of the First World War and the importance of paying tribute to the sacrifices of soldiers during that time period is really important. Within the Senate context, I think the war paintings are probably the most important tribute that we see and really serve as a reminder to senators when they're doing their job in terms of who they're there representing and the sacrifices of Canadians and why we have to protect our parliamentary democracy. The paintings aren't all the same size, but in general, they're about 10 feet high by around 15 feet wide, give or take a little bit, which exceeds the size of the doors. So it was quite a challenge to actually get them out of the space. We worked closely with the War Museum as well as Public Services and Procurement Canada and Fine Arts conservators in order to develop a strategy for removing them from the building. The entire scope of work took about 2 months to complete, and what we had to do is build scaffolding within the Senate chamber to access the paintings. Then 2 at a time, they were removed from the walls, placed down on a large stretcher, and then placed flat, and we actually had to remove the paintings from the stretchers, roll them on large tubes and take them out of the building, which was quite a lengthy process, and it's something that you want to make sure that you're doing properly not to cause new damage to the paintings themselves. Overall, it went really well and everyone was quite happy with how the work went, but it certainly was a challenge given the size of the doors and the size of the paintings. And we just wanted to make sure the significance of those paintings is maintained so that they can go back into center block when the Senate is ready to return.